My name is Alison Burden, and I'm a program director with Habitat for Humanity, and I focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this session is really important to me because what we're talking about is housing-led approaches for vulnerable groups. And over the last morning, up until now, we've heard a lot about these vulnerable groups. We've heard about the Roma. We've heard about old people. We've heard about people with disabilities. We've heard about migrants and refugees. We've heard about LGBTIQ. And this session is really about how can we find solutions for those people. And I'm so grateful because we have an amazing group of people who are going to help us explore this subject. They range from the UN, the IOM, we have Roma representatives, we have researchers, and to start, we have Césarée. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So there'll be 3 sections to the session. First, we'll have a presentation from Césarée and then from Kata. And we're really grateful to you both. And then we'll have a panel session. And then I'll be turning to you. There won't be Q&A. We'll be asking you to have a conversation with each other. So I would ask again, if you could move forward and sit next to somebody, that will help me. Please move forward and sit next to somebody so that you can have a conversation together. Okay, Césarée, over to you. Please, he will be speaking in Polish, so please use your interpretation if you need it.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cezary Mierzejewski. I work in social cooperatives, and for many years I was the participant of the dialogue with the government to deinstitutionalize. It was a different quality dialogue, to call a spade a spade. And my objective is to give you a handful of information which casts the light on broader context, how to deinstitutionalize for the benefit of different groups. What I want to say is, well, removal of red tape is making services social, to make them a household name, to create activities that make it possible to support and render services closest to the place people live. Poland, I don't want to use the word strange or weird, but we are different from other European countries. The state is waving a white flag, no longer supports people in need. They are supported by the families. Families carry the burden of different support forms. And this support may not require broader activities. My parents were younger. Everything was okay. Now the situation is different. It's more complex. And access to services is becoming more and more problematic. We can also say that institutions should open up. They should be the subject of reforms. But it boils down to one thing. There should be some alternative so that people can choose. Because it's the right to choose. Rarely do we speak about elderly people. Rarely do we speak about people with disabilities. Rarely do we speak about people suffering from housing crisis or mental health crisis, ethnic minorities, national minorities. There is a plethora and abundance of groups that I cannot call here. And these groups have no choice. They are given the offer, take it or leave it. They cannot decide where and how they want to live, how to decide about their own lives. This is the most serious question in Poland. Wherever you look, you'll find this problem. Whatever you do, you'll find such places. And this is the key question. It's a delicate question at the same time. Because, well, our relationships with the government, we and other groups wanted to do things exactly the same. So if we want to deinstitutionalize, if we want to give people the right to choose, this means a simple thing. They need to be tailor-made to every social question, to every social group. More often than not, we need to have a separate, a different solution. Housing is a very good example. This is what we've been discussing all day today. And the third element that is very important in this process. If you are pushed into the institution, the person is called a problem. And I'm using this word, a problem of the institution. If you remain in your local society, milieus, in your environment, with your family, it requires to mobilize many institutions and organizations and individuals. And this brings about new quality. And this is very important for us because community, civic community is in extinction in Poland. This is also very important from the point of view of social solidarity development. So what does it apply to? It applies to the groups that I mentioned and each and every one of us, all inhabitants. Some of them feel it even stronger. There is a great income diversity in Poland. Some people are able to provide for living and get services and pay for them. Others have to wait for solutions offered by the state. The state may offer them. They may or may not finance the services. And we have to fall back on the family and the nearest and dearest or an NGO. I was wondering, we want to supply social services to those who cannot afford to pay for them. This is a basic priority. We've got many social support homes that are beautiful, but you have to pay through the nose. But who can afford them? Not many people, even in this room, can afford to pay for them. If you ask, can we provide 24/7 assistance? Of course, there are people who can pay for that. But most of us cannot pay for that, for this kind of service. And, well, I'm tired of speaking about housing because, Poland is a country of absurdity. We may not differ in this respect from other countries in Europe, but we are the front runners when it comes to absurdity. So what is my expectation from the government? What should they do? First and foremost, I would like to see the political will. The social questions, the deinstitutionalizing questions, there is no person responsible for that, no manager. These are ministries like social policies, health ministry, and others. As far as I remember, look at me, and my memory stretches back in time a long time. I have no good experiences. The same pertains to education, exactly the same situation. So we have a certain problem, political will or lack of political will. We keep waiting to see it. To be more concrete, what I expect, I want to see a coherent end-to-end action plan. We have worked for 2 years with the government to create a document that proposes tailor-made and concrete activities that are targeted at specific people. We have the toolkit that includes legal solutions, financial solutions. We didn't want to have a separate set of activities for homeless people, a separate set of activities for the elderly, and a separate one for people with disabilities, and so on and so forth. We were speaking about families, society, environment, and the most important thing, flats, habitat, abode, because this is most important for all people. These might be the people who come of age and are no longer the inhabitants of children's homes, people with disabilities, Romas, elderly people. Second of all, coordination is the key word. We don't have any coordination in Poland. It's not only a national problem, it's a local problem too. No coordination. Third of all, well-devised financial support systems. Local governments cannot afford it. 8% of local government people say that this is an important question for them. Only 8%. We need money to employ people who are competent enough to provide social services and take off the burden from the family's shoulders, that support people in everyday functioning, people who are professionals, who are knowledgeable. This is the recipe for success. And the fourth question, flats. And what we expect here are direct and clear activities. I'm not speaking about the whole problem in Poland because I believe it has been discussed at length. You know the problem in Poland, in other parts of Europe. We were dealing with supported housing, so flats targeted at vulnerable people, those who suffer from social problems, if you will. We don't exactly know how many flats that we have. It's an assessment. There's about 2,000. The government says, let's have about 12,000 over a 5-year period. Still too few. But in order to do so, we need to introduce something. You cannot pay for this with the European Union money. You cannot pay for this with any other solutions. We need systemic solutions. So if we have a developer, when they build a building, there is a percentage of flats that are given to supported flats.
Oh, that is what I was about listening.
But what people discuss now, what the governments discuss now, is this 2% or 5% mortgage that we have in Poland? I can guarantee you cannot afford it, whether this is 5 or 2%. And the last element that I want to attract your attention to, something that will be discussed here, Roma. We collaborate with the Ministry of European Funds. We discussed it too. Diversified attitude. Question of flats is visible. Flats are overcrowded. They have not been renovated for long. So we wanted to work out recommendations together with the Ministry of European Funds. We're discussing education, professional and vocational trainings, and flats too. This is one of the elements that we want to speak about. Deinstitutionalization is important for everybody, but to a different extent in different areas. Thank you. That was my intervention.
Thank you so much. Really important reflections there on the need for political will, on coordination at all levels, on financial support. These people are often the most vulnerable and they need financial support. The need for more housing, simply more housing that is targeted at these people, and a specific call around the Roma. So thank you very much, Cezary, for your intervention. Really, really important points that I think will also come up in the presentation by Kata, who has been part of a research around the Roma that Habitat has carried out. So if we could put Kata's presentation up. And Kata, please feel free to let them know you need the next slide. Okay? Just give us one moment. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It is a privilege for me to be here and speak in front of such an audience. And thank you very much for showing up and showing an interest. So my presentation is going to be about our research titled Addressing Housing Deprivation of Roma in Central and Eastern Europe, commissioned by Habitat for Humanity last year. It was a research that had 11 contributors, all local researchers from the region, anyway, 7 of whom were Roma themselves, including my co-lead researcher partner. Now, what was this about? Maybe I can do this, or maybe I can have... There you go. All right. So here you see a map about the countries that we investigated. These were 9 Eastern European countries, 5 of which were EU member states, and 6 of which were primary. Primary as picked by Habitat, where we are hoping to be able to invest some more into housing, into Roma issues. So why is Roma issues important for us? It is because it's the largest minority in Europe, estimated approximately to 10 to 12 million people. And all these countries here have a significant proportion of Roma inhabitants, amounting almost as high as 10% in Bulgaria, North Macedonia, Romania, Slovakia, and even in Hungary, where I'm from, it is amounting to maybe 7 to 8, 9% of the population. So the housing conditions for Roma in Central Eastern Europe are often precarious. There are legal uncertainties, informal settlements, and the threat of eviction. So Roma people are always much more vulnerable than the majority population. And why is segregation so important to us? It's because there's a direct link between segregation and early school dropouts, a limited labor access, and a very limited and expensive access to public services. We can have the next slide, please. Just let me show you a couple of figures so that we can all acknowledge why it is important to target the Roma when it comes to housing development. Out of these, I would just like to pinpoint 2 or 3, like 82% live in overcrowded households, or 22%, which means more than every fifth Roma live in households without indoor tap water, which is compared to 1.5 EU average is extremely high, and in Romania, this amount exceeds 40%. 10% live without electricity, or every third Roma person lives in a household without an indoor toilet or indoor bathroom. A dwelling is considered deprived if any one of these conditions prevail. Our research examined the national housing policies of these 9 countries, and I won't go into details into it. However, the housing policy of the EU is worth mentioning. Just a couple of thoughts. Housing is a member state competence. So EU has not a direct influence on the housing for the member states, but it can influence through the policies of social inclusion, equality, regional growth, and urban development. So it is important to mention that there is no self-standing right to housing, and there is no dedicated housing policy framework on the European level. There are 2 principles, and we can have the next slide, please, that anyone who is into housing development, be it international organizations or municipalities or NGOs, there are 2 principles that should be observed, and one is desegregation. In other words, relocation of people who live in ghettos and slums and segregated areas into integrated neighborhood, or at least intervening along the non-segregation principle, which means it should not contribute to perpetuation of segregation. One more thought about the European policy. On the next slide, please. It is worth mentioning the EU Roma framework, which regulated to address the socio and economic disparities faced by the Roma communities. It was launched in 2011, and then in 2020, the EU Roma strategic framework for equality, inclusion and participation 2020-2030 was accepted, which set quantitative targets. One of the most important is to ensure that the majority of Roma people do not face housing deprivation and do not live in overcrowded households anymore. Can I have the next slides, please? We examined best practices, and there is no time to now elaborate on all those good practices that we have found all over these 9 countries. However, we have found out all those attributes that all those good practices that were sustainable share in common. So there are some of which a combination could ensure that a housing solution for Roma relocation can be sustainable. So most important that it should be a holistic approach, which means that it should involve proactive cooperation with local authorities and establishing housing strategies at the municipal level, involving the community itself. We have found that involvement of Roma people already at the planning stage is a key to sustainable solutions. The approach must be rooted in the community engagement, which means that not only engage the people but also train and empower them. It also involves training the new neighborhood dwellers so that they are open for receiving and accepting the integration of Roma people. And of course, there is one more, the financial empowerment, because without a very good, very well-working financial scheme, not on the individual basis, but as a whole system, should be paired. All right, can we have the next slide? I don't want to elaborate too much on bad practices. All we need to see is all those solutions did not last or struggle or need extra much more investment than was previously thought it was necessary, were all those practices that we have collected, and there are some attributes like they were not involving the Roma people themselves. There was such a big information gap. There was there were no community work, no training, and so on. Therefore, there are some challenges, and we can have the next slide, please. For example, the information gap, like how to target the next investment. Should it be comprehensive so that it will involve all disadvantaged people, or should it be Roma-focused and or Roma-targeted? As policymakers and organizations address this housing deprivation, it is very important to think about all these challenges, and I'm very happy to share with you the results of our research soon when it becomes public. So, the difficulty due to the lack of proper documentation of individuals and properties, the deficit in political commitment to tackle segregation, and I would like to reflect on Cesare, that we understand that it's not very popular to deal with Roma issues as a politician, Plus, there is always a protest from the integrated neighborhoods. So it is quite difficult to achieve this. However, it's not impossible to garnish some political will, which would overarch political cycles. The development and enforcement of housing standards, formulation of all-encompassing policies, and the exploration of social housing opportunities, all of these present challenges. And can I have the last one, please? The recommendations. To break the cycle of intergenerational poverty and social inclusion, access to decent, desegregated housing is essential. This involves long-term solutions like adequate social housing, affordable rental programs and targeted housing allowances, coupled with community building and empowerment integrated into national strategies. So, to summarize the recommendations, which were primarily prepared for Habitat, however, there are a lot of them that could be observed by policymakers, municipalities, and other organizations who are engaged in housing development. So there should be inclusive collaboration with the local stakeholders, including municipalities. There should be the political will. There should be a comprehensive legal framework, particularly in regions with undocumented Roma, which is a very important issue. For example, in Ukraine, one of the observed investigated countries, and also down in the Balkan countries. And engaging the Roma community, I cannot emphasize it enough how important it is to give the power into the hands of Roma, and upscaling more integrated approach. Don't forget that financial arrangements, microloans, should be also a part of development programs. Thank you very much, Alison.
Thank you, Katja. Really important, building on Cesai's presentation, political will being really important, financial solutions, host communities and working with host communities and Roma. I'm very excited about this research, and I think it represents a very important time for Habitat to be really addressing the issue of this particularly vulnerable group. I think sometimes we can lose hope because we feel as if change is very difficult. But the other thing that has been underscored is the need to really coordinate and communicate together, work together. And many of you in this room, and I'm looking at some of you, are working with the Roma. And so you have experiences. And I hope as we come towards the end of the session, you'll have a chance to tell us what you can do, just as Patrick called us to earlier. We all have power to bring about change. So I'm going to turn now to the panel. We have a wonderful panel here, including representatives of the Roma community. I'm going to quickly run through very quickly their names. We've got Christine from UNHCR. We've got Gabor, who also did the research with Kata. We've got Monica, who comes from the International Organization of Migration. And then we have Daniela, who works for the Council of the European Development Bank, Council of Europe Development Bank, forgive me. And then we have Dr. Joanna, who's president of the Foundation Towards Dialogue. So I'm very grateful that you could be with us. And my first question is around reaching the most vulnerable, right? We've heard that it can be challenging to actually access vulnerable people. And we've heard they need to be involved in the programs. We've heard the real importance of reaching out to them. Could you tell me how you have managed to reach vulnerable and excluded groups, they may be the Roma or others, and how you've successfully engaged them in designing programs, in implementing programs, and in monitoring programs? And I'll start with you, and then you can pass it along.
All right. Thank you very much. Specifically on Roma for UNHCR, we conduct visits where we identify a highest concentration of Roma community. But what has worked really well in a modest sense, of course, has been to hire people from the community, from the Roma community, to join our workforce. We have a team of protection monitors, so they are really our eyes and ears to understand issues faced by refugees. I'm talking specifically about Poland, and having been able to recruit a protection monitor of Roma origin has been very useful, because they tend to the community tends to trust them more to engage in conversation, but also to address some of the issues. And they tend to also play maybe an additional role, which is often what we call intercultural mediators a little bit. So a bit this interface between to solve some misunderstandings, or to go beyond the often the prejudice that the Roma community is facing. So that has proven to deepen our understanding of the issues and not to remain at the surface of common, or what we understood as to be common issues. And the third element has been, of course, to work with partners, including the different Roma organizations working in Poland, to have partnerships, but also to educate us, to educate our workforce, for us to understand also better how to be helpful, how to not have bias, and how to propose solutions to train us, to train our other partners. And really, the education element is key if we want to even come closer to some of the recommendations brought forward. So I will keep it here, but I would say these are 1, 2, 3, how we try to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Gabor, what have you got to add?
Before answering your question, let me bring one sentence what I heard from a mother who is a Hungarian-speaking Ukrainian Roma as a refugee in Hungary. And she told me that, Gabor, look, my family is hated in Ukraine by the Russians because we are two Ukrainians. In Hungary, we are hated because they say that we are too much Ukrainians. And in Hungary, we are hated because we are simply gypsy. So what the hell can I do? And this is what is happening practically. So I'm not sure whether you know that we Roma, we have been living here in Europe at least for 600 years. We share habits, we share language, we share history, we share culture, we share everything. And still, 10,000s of Roma, or better to say millions of Roma, if we speak on European level, still live in those circumstances like no one else wants to live in. Here in Poland to Hungary, not to mention Romania or the Balkan countries. And the problem is manifolded. It's really hard to say that housing is the biggest problem. It's really hard to say that education is the biggest problem. It's really hard to say that health is the biggest problem. If you ask me, the biggest problem is prejudice and discrimination. Otherwise, we could have came out from this living standards and situation and would be invisible. It doesn't mean that we are invisible. It means that not discriminated against. So to start working with Roma, it's pretty easy. We live practically everywhere except Malta, where I live. This is the only EU country where Roma are not an official minority. And this is not the reason why we moved there from Hungary. But in fact, if someone has just a little free time, just a little power, what she or he wants to spend to do something good, there are always possibilities to start working with. One example, The foundation what I'm managing back in Malta is teaching Roma kids in Hungary, Slovakia, and Ukraine for digital literacy, coding, and robotics. And we work with, we call them IT mentors, but they are everyday Roma parents, most of them, teaching other kids and their kids as well. And we can see the effects, which is imminent and great. And their grades, they're starting getting better from one day to the other.
Thank you, Gabor. Thank you. How about the IOM?
Thank you very much, Christine and Gabor. We agreed with Joanna that we switch into Polish, if you don't mind, to keep some balance in language balance. Give you a minute here to...
So we've been talking about Roma communities, Roma minorities, but at this session, we would also like to have a broader look on a wider group of people that are vulnerable, that have very specific needs to be addressed. So the question is, how do we reach out to this group? How do we successfully implement activities and monitor them later on? Indeed, it's a big challenge. These populations normally don't speak up. We need to reach out to them first. Being international organizations, IOM has an extensive system of need analysis so that we can engage this group at the point of designing activities. We don't want to decide anything without including them. That's our policy. We include the groups, target groups, at the very early stage of need assessment. The target groups are really crucial. Right now in Poland, there is a public debate on vulnerable groups going on. Also, the special act is being amended, also with respect to collective accommodation. And the challenge that we are facing right now is also because of the groups that are still inhabiting those collective shelters. But for some reason, these populations have not become independent. They are the most vulnerable groups, and they include Roma. So reaching out to the Roma requires us being with them and building mutual trust. So from the outset, the IOM, starting from the border crossing in Medica, we were present. We took active role in the south of Poland, in different cities and towns. And we have a special protection team that provides assistance to vulnerable groups. And we also have psychosocial support teams. So they were always very close to those groups so that we can hear them directly and take what they say into account at the point of creating our programs. Now, the discussion that we've had together with Joanna, there was one case of collective shelter that to 100% was populated by the Roma people. It has been shut down. And we had a discussion with managers of such shelters, and we checked how ready they are to accept these populations. And we saw a difficulty in them. They felt kind of a blockade. They had a difficulty even saying, no, we don't want them. We don't want these populations because they only generate problems, because the local community is skeptical. So these were indeed quite tough discussions that we had to run with these shelter managers. That's why I'm saying that we need trust at the point of designing projects and then monitoring them. I think this is really key. That's it from me. Thanks.
Frankly speaking, it's very difficult to speak about good practices. I'm going to be concrete. Many things, many important things were said here. We can identify problems, we can identify good practices, and we've seen a number of good examples that are contrary to what is happening in Poland, like desegregation, and we've got segregation in Poland. The segregation is aggravated here in Poland, especially when we speak about people flee from their countries. Well, we are still discussing this in Poland and European Union countries, and it's hard to believe, and it's happening in front of our eyes. And we kind of give our consent to this happening. I say we, because, well, I need to call a spade a spade. We need to bear in mind our position. We are an NGO. We represent Roma people here in Poland, and our situation is really difficult because our voice is less important than political voices of international important organizations or institutions. Starting 2004, we have had Roma integration program in Poland. There were different names attached to it, there were different faces, and that is one of the priorities that is associated with housing. And still, we keep facing the same challenges that we had 10, 20, 25 years ago. Can you believe that? What is a great problem too is that the program was created by Roma organizations back in 1990s. There is no regular evaluation, so I don't know what has changed. Is there any political will to change the situation? And on top of that, Roma people were not included in designing the program, so they have no impact on evaluation, monitoring, and the program is not flexible at all. Speaking about refugees situation in Poland, there's been a huge complication because the people had brought a certain burden of social exclusion in Poland upon migrating. So upon arrival of NGOs, there was a different attitude. They wanted to listen to what we have to say. What we were surprised to see was that there were no Roma person in NGO who was employed by the organization. So we speak about good practices. Well, my suggestion is to create a network of collaboration is of key importance. We need to have more inclusive institutions that would employ us meaning the Roma people. Roma people should be working in organizations that work for the benefit of our community. We are not refugees for the first time in our history, and still there is no place for us in the institutions that work for our benefit and that are responsible for us and for our fate.
Thank you. Really important points raised, I think. The importance of being inclusive organizations, employing representatives from vulnerable groups, the importance of political will, the importance of deliberate outreach and effort, and the fact that it takes extra effort, the importance of working with representative organizations, Roma-led organizations, organizations that are led by these vulnerable groups. Really important. Thank you for your contribution. One of the things that has been raised throughout the day has been how we take programs to scale. A lot of our programs might help 40 families or even 100 or maybe 1,000. But a lot of people have been speaking about the need for systemic change. And so my second question is about that. What examples do you have, or what ideas do you have about how we can achieve sustainable change at scale beyond the project? You referred a little bit to learning from the past, and I think that might be one of the solutions. But maybe we could start with you, Joanna, on that question, and feel free to speak in Polish and just launch in there.
Okay, thank you.
I know that we need to be brief, so let me jump into most important to discuss most important points, how to implement sustainable change. It is not only the change that pertains to Roma society, but the general public. Let's be more inclusive in creation of our institutions so that they are inclusive also for people who represent any group, including groups of Romas, so that we don't have programs that people chuck us in. We have to meet certain criteria. Even if these are Roma people who are not well qualified, they don't speak 5 languages and they are not Oxford graduates, they have this internal perspective that makes it possible for them to understand different challenges they might face. It is important to understand that we are diversified. So, the local level and the social diversity, when it comes to culture and social situations, it is associated with the region. So, Roma people will be representing collaborative institutions. Roma people from Ukraine arrived to Poland. We have Towards Dialogue, sorry for messing up the name, we employed Roma people from Ukraine. This made it possible to understand the specificity. We are Roma representatives. These are the people who work in this organization. I wanted to understand the specificity of culture, economy, and their social status. It is of key importance. So situational diagnosis is of utmost importance. Let us stop doing things, doing it anyhow. It's a waste of money. So we need to take into consideration the diversity of Roma people and local communities. We are not a monolith. Engagement of different stakeholders, the actors, if you will, who will respond and engage in the program. We need financial resources, systemic solutions. We need experts who know how to solve social problems. Homelessness, chronic homelessness, poverty. Well, we cannot respond to this. Monitoring, evaluation and flexibility, so readiness for changes. If something is not right, this is a challenge that we need to respond to. And social inclusion at every phase. You start identifying the challenges. Not only do we speak about habitat, when we speak about Roma people, I come from this group of people, I work with these people. Not only is this in habitat, this is the question of whatever is associated with all the challenges, social challenges included. Without the right support, we are unable to give them people freedom to be self-dependent because they get a flat, because they'll have a flat, destroy a flat, and they have the same situation. We've got the examples in the south of Poland. There are certain settlements of people that are becoming poorer and poorer because people do not have financial resources to support themselves because of lack of education, lack of work. This is a vicious circle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can hear the level of passion and engagement in the issue. What experience have you got with sustainability? I know you talked a little bit about learning from the past.
Yes, so this is specifically relevant to the HERO project that the Council of Europe is implementing, because the ambition behind this project from the very beginning, it's an initiative that's funded by the European Parliament. It's overseen by the European Commission. So the ambition was that it's in being a pilot, we would test a model that would be replicable across EU countries. So it's very interesting because the project is set to conclude next year, but there are a lot of emerging lessons that we are already learning. We have a HERO methodology that at the beginning we knew we will have to adapt to make it impactful, relevant to the local context. However, we are discovering that more adaptations, refinement is required. So just to give you an example, in Slovakia, where we are implementing the project, even two villages are different. So the project is implemented very well in one village, but then
the neighboring village, the situation is completely different. The situation of the Roma community is different. The availability of land stock in the municipality is different. The political commitment of the local authority is different. So this is just one example to illustrate how different the scaling and replication is within one country. And we are implementing the project in Slovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria. So now, although we've started implementation with one methodology, we are seeing that we have to completely change and adjust. So as it was mentioned by Joanna as well, I think we have all heard, we all know of successful models. I just with the caveat that I think having to work with developmental projects, we can't say all our successes. They're effective. We are working with people. These are not white, black models to implement, but we've all heard of effective even desegregation housing models in Segovia in Spain, in Romania and Reșița. There are examples. However, at least from my experience, there is a substantial amount of refining, adjustment, even reiteration of the same initiative that needs to happen. For example, in Slovakia, where the project is being implemented really well, I would say, we needed 6 years to get where we are. With reiteration and adaptation year after year. And I couldn't stress enough how important it is to have a committed local authority and to work together with NGOs. Because from my previous experience working in philanthropy, NGOs have the resources, the expertise, the flexibility, most important, to implement this type of innovative solutions that the governments cannot, or they cannot afford because of the political cost. So these strategic partnerships between NGOs and the local government are crucial. And on the other hand, the local government bring the legitimacy, the credibility that make this type of innovative initiative acceptable by the Roma community, because they're just more credible to the Roma community, where trust is so important.
Thank you.
So yes, I think we have solutions. What we need is political will, implementation, learning, reiteration, and adjustment.
Thank you. And collaboration was also highlighted. Yeah. Do you have anything to add on sustainability? Briefly?
Maybe a couple of words.
A few words. It's been 2 years since the crisis started, so we've got the lesson learned. So we need what has proven worthy, what is not. Comprehensive support is the right tool, especially in housing, and making people self-reliant, especially the most vulnerable group. Although we don't have the right housing availability, this is a huge problem, but comprehensive support, not only providing a flat, but also the response to the need, like language, psychological support, mental support, health services, work-related services, so that the people are comprehensively taken care of. So this is the onset of the process that leads to the independence, because this is a lengthy and costly process. This is a case management. So every person, every family is supervised for a long time. You need to support them and accompany them in every step of the process. IOM, why didn't we decide to enter the Cash for Rent program? We don't have enough flats, but this is not the money that is the problem. If you give people money, give them financial support, maybe even 100% or part of the rent, but still it is not the solution. At the end of the day, it doesn't make the family independent. The family is taken care of for a number of months, but at the end of the day, you discover that the problem returns. Therefore, we collaborate with Habitat for Humanity. We support the programs. Step into Your Home is the name of the program. So this is a program that gives you the possibility of support. and this is the advocacy to do away with cliches and stereotypes. We show the general public that this is the process, and the process requires a comprehensive end-to-end approach.
Thank you. Really important points around advocacy. Around time, many of you have talked about the need for time for change, but also learning and adaptation. Gabor, a brief contribution?
A brief contribution reflecting what Joanna said. A predicament for sustainability is always a good example. So we try to find a good example on the field of housing in the mentioned 9 countries, and we couldn't find. Because if something was technically well managed, then it turned out at the end of the story that it was somehow enhancing segregation. If it was led by Roma, then it turned out at the end that it was financially unsustainable. So I don't know the answer for your question, and this is the biggest problem. But if we come back to the original question, and this is political willingness, we have been experiencing and seeing projects very well working, including RomEd program of the Commission. I know from inside, I used to work in there. I cannot recite any purely good example from the field of housing. And one aspect, one sentence, I spent practically my entire adult life on the field of education and advocacy in education. And the biggest problem, what we see right now in many countries, that the segregation in all of the countries, segregation from children, is increasing. And the acceptance of this situation is also increasing. So no one cares. No one cares. Not even Roma parents. It seems that they are satisfied with the current situation. And there are not really anyone, including those NGOs who used to sue local governments, national governments, churches, school sustainers, whoever, for segregation. They don't exist any longer.
Thank you, Gabor. That's not a hopeful intervention, but it may be true. And so perhaps it's a call to us in the room about how courageous we are to take a stand. Something to add?
Yeah, well, I think to build on the political willingness, I think we need policies, and we need strong public investment on the housing side for all, because throughout the day it was obvious that the housing issue cuts across Europe, cuts across the different population, and of course has a greater impact on vulnerable populations, including in Roma. So we need to have, all of us do interesting and important work, but as you said, we are serving a very small portion of the population, and that's very good for those who benefit from the different programs we have with Habitat here in Poland and other interesting policy changes like the social renting agency. But what I mean is that this is still niche. So we want to take it out of the niche. But for that, we collectively can do advocacy, but it's a lot of money. And if you don't have a real conscious policy by any government, in this case of Poland, you're not going to come even close to that. And let alone being able to talk about desegregation and so on. So my call for action, I know it's not now, but just to say we need to continue advocate, because it's a problem really affecting more and more people in all countries. And we don't have the answer because we simply don't have the tools at our disposal to create policies that are, first of all, develop affordable housing for all, but then within this incorporate an integration element and a real social lens to make sure vulnerable groups, as Cesare mentioned in the early days, are considered, and that the needs that can be very different than the general population are considered. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the panel there. I know we had a third question, but I really would like to hear from you as an audience. So I'd like you to find somebody who speaks your language in the audience. So if you're not sitting next to someone with whom you have a common language, can you find somebody and move? Find somebody who speaks your language so that you can have a brief conversation. And then I'll give you a couple of questions. Have you found someone? Kata, you've got someone? Have you got someone to talk to? Everyone found someone? Fantastic. Okay. So your first question. Somebody said to me yesterday, we need to be brave enough to radically include. Radical inclusion. So what is it that you can do within your organization or as an individual to be radically inclusive? Have a chat with your neighbor. How is the conversation? Are you having fun? Radically inclusive. Does anyone have anything to share? Anyone? Does any couple or group have anything to share about how to be radically inclusive? I love it. You're not listening to me. Yeah? You have something? Do you have something? Yeah? Okay, can everyone listen to me? I've got my hand up. Put your hand up if you see me. Put your hand up if you see me. Ah, that works. Fantastic. Does anyone have anything to share about being radically inclusive and what we can do? Yes. Just briefly, so others have a chance.
Very briefly, we the three of us are from Middle East. So displacement and refugees is a main issue in Middle East. So we thought we talked about if we really want to be radically inclusive, we have to address the refugees issues in a broader scope in Middle East, starting like examples that were set here, starting from be participatory, starting from the needs assessment and being also engaged in the intervention, design, and the implementation.
Thank you, colleagues from the Middle East. Shukran. We're so grateful that you're here. And that's a really important point. It's a call for us to involve people in the design of our programs and to listen to them. Yes, anyone else? George, do you have something? Yeah, radically inclusive mayor from Sofia.
Yeah, I'm George Iliev. I'm a mayor of a district which has more than 10% Roma population. I've been in my first mandate, I've been radically inclusive. The second thing I did is to appoint a deputy mayor from the community. And he was like working with his own people there. And, but okay, the salary is not good enough, unfortunately. And now on the second mandate, I lost him. But what I can tell is that we achieved something which I tried to make a model for whole of Bulgaria. And people are thinking about it. We achieved more than 90%, talking about inclusion, more than 90% of the people of the students go to school of the total Roma population in the district, and we have also 80% of the grown-ups are actually having a job, and they're included also. And the biggest problem is that they started living so well that people from around the country are now attracted to that place because they have, similar people and the local, people that live more than 20, 30, 40 years in the district are now fighting with them, pushing them back. So now we're facing the problem of inclusion by the previously excluded. So
interesting. Complex situation. Thank you for sharing. And I know you'll be sharing more tomorrow, I think, George. Anyone else been inspired with some thoughts about how to be radically inclusive? Or even just slightly inclusive? That's okay too. Yes? Polish. I would.
Będę mówić po polsku, no to szybciutko założę słuchawki. I'll tell you about two things. Here in Warsaw, there is a street that I live in spring and summer and early autumn. There's a group of 2 or 3 women that I see quite often. They are Roma ladies. It has continued for many years. We've made friends, kind of. We meet, they greet me, and they want to fortune tell. And I think this inclusion process of Roma people into general public, whatever country we are speaking about, this inclusion, in addition to any forms of help, should recognize that the people are different, recognize otherness, recognize that the fact that they have different needs in natural relations, that they've got their own traditions. People say, oh, there's a gypsy lady who's going to fortune tell for you. It's a cliche in society, but it's their tradition. It's not a problem for me. And there are people who are afraid of them. So this is something you need to see. One of the things. And another thing, full inclusion of Roma people. Here in Poland, there is a tangible example. Patryk Jaki, who is of Roma origin, in the previous terms of office, he was a deputy minister at the Ministry of Justice, and he is EMP now. It shows that you can do it, you can be effective, you can reach a very high social position in this country.
Thank you. Thank you. Often we cite individual examples, and they're often an example of the exception, and I think they're important. But really, until we see significant change, we can often use them. Oh, well, there's a woman in Parliament. There's a Roma in Parliament. It's not necessarily that deep systemic change. So thank you for the example. And they are often pioneers that really show that example. But until we see people following, it can be hard to see change. So last comment, and then I'm going to go back to the panel. Oh, you had something to be radically.
I don't know if I have something that is really radical, but I think that one aspect of being radical is to ask questions, and to be able to have a public debate as well that unveils concepts, ideas that seems to be good for everyone, and maybe they are not. And in this sense, that I also addressed the panel. I was struck by the presentation of the research. I haven't read the research, so probably I misunderstand. And I come from the perspective of an urbanist, so I probably not fitting that. But when you say they use the word desegregation and relocation to another place, a relocation to an area which is supposed to be open, integrated, and so on, my question is, who decides that that area is integrated? According to which standards? Who decides that people have to be relocated?
and who is benefiting from that relocation. Very often, from an urbanistic perspective, when people are relocated, the area where they are, even especially if they are in a situation of vulnerability, that area may be a prime site for development, and somebody else is speculating on that area. So even, and that's the part of being radical, maybe, also asking, do we all understand the same when we say desegregation?
I think that you are asking really, really important questions. Who decides? Who is the measure? What is the motivation? You're talking about, often in the UK, we talk about gentrification, right? And then people are moved and relocated, and it's just a way of pushing away actually people who owned spaces and lived in community in those spaces. Thank you for raising the question. I think challenge and questions is part of it. Good. Thank you. I'd like you just to spend 1 minute reflecting on what you've learned from this session. And then I'm going to turn to the panelists and ask you to give one message, a short message to the people in the room as they leave, because we would like to see more inclusion and more radical inclusion. And so you think about what you've learned, and then we'll just give you a few key messages. It's a lot, okay, what's your message? What's important? Yeah.
Yours. Oh my God, this is very official now. All right. So my message is, as citizens, as advocates, whoever you represent, I would say call for strong public policies, strong public investment, and structural reforms to address the chronic housing shortage, and make that a package so the housing shortage and the policies on housing also look into integration of minorities. Thank you.
My message is even simpler. Every person in this room and the other room could be the advocate of integration. I want you to leave the room to think of you that you could be the advocate of integration. Second one, it means if next time, if you hear someone telling something negative of a specific part of the society, you could be the one telling, think again. Nothing else. Think again. Thanks.
My message is that let's build more comprehensive support, long-term programs and solutions to include vulnerable people, but host communities, all of us. It is not only about us, it is about all of us. Yeah, let's take this initiative, not only for vulnerable groups, but we are with the vulnerable groups. That's the message for today.
Good.
Yeah, thank you for attending today. My message for the citizen in the room would be to expose yourself, try to learn more about the Roma, try not to normalize the prejudice that you see around. Maybe for the representatives of the local authorities, continue to be brave, as we've heard from the Bulgarian Roma mayor. I have personally seen examples when one good supported mayor had turned around an entire council that was against Roma issues. And maybe for the founders of the NGOs in this room, if there are any, I would encourage you to provide long-term general support, flexible support to NGOs that goes beyond projects to enable NGOs, Roma-led NGOs, to do what they can do best without worrying about project timelines, which is very damaging to building trust with the Roma communities.
Thank you. And finally, Joanna.
Maybe I try to say something more positive in the end, because we discussed about the problems and challenges today. But I would like to strongly emphasize that we have a really strong community. And we are ready and we are able to be your partners in many levels. But we need to be seen, we need to be more visible. And we do our best. And we made so many efforts to be closer. And we won't stop definitely. But we need to be seen by you as well. So strong partnership and visibility, it's something which might be very, very helpful. And remember, we have a very strong community and we are able to take matters in our hands.
Thank you so much. Well, I have nothing more to add. I really would like to thank you all for coming and for your inspiration and for the hard work that you do. Thank you for your presentation, and thanks also to Césarée for yours. And now it's over to you, citizens. Thank you.
And very pretty to be able to sound loud.